Well, folks, when you do a podcast dedicated to Seinfeld, you make a short list of who you want on, and we're very excited to have on here one of the pioneers of the show. He belongs on Mount Rushmore of Seinfeld. He is writer, exec producer of Seinfeld for almost the entire run, seasons 2 through 8. Wrote episodes, the Implant, the Hamptons, the Visa, the Virgin. Came up with Double Dip, Shrinkage, Low Flow, Real and Spectacular, You're So Good Looking. I mean, this guy's written a ton of books. He worked with Howard Cosell, Tony Kornheiser, produced a web series called Narrow World of Sports. Peter Mehlman, thank you so much for being here, Peter.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we are super excited. You know, just going through some of those episodes you wrote, it seems to be a lot of your stories revolved around relationships, whether it was, you know, George wanting Jerry's girlfriend to like him in The Masseuse, or, you know, George not wanting Jerry to be funny, you know, in The Visa. A lot of relationship stuff, a lot of personal appearance stuff with the hairpiece, body odor, breast implants, nose job. It just seemed to be your wheelhouse, kind of writing about relationships. Is this something you're obviously conscious of? Is it, you know, just kind of touch on that a little bit for us, just kind of get an idea of your writing style and your relationship humor?
Yeah, you know, that's true, and I've never exactly understood why that was. I mean, you know, I was out and dating around during the show, and, you know, had been in New York for many years. And while I was a freelance writer my last 5 years in New York, I used to write a lot of articles and essays for women's magazines. You know, like I'd be writing for like Mademoiselle and Elle and Glamour. And, you know, so I was writing a lot of things from male point of view. And, you know, that's where relationship-y stuff was really the main course. So, yeah, I'm glad you noticed that there was at least some kind of loose theme. There was also another one in a way, because the whole thing about, you know, different kinds of birth control was in there too.
It's true, yeah.
There was the sponge. There was the thing about where, you know, Elaine says in front of the Virgin, tells her this whole story about how she dropped her diaphragm on the street.
Yep.
And, you know, there was something about vasectomies, and then there was Kramer having a low sperm count. So, you know, I don't know. I guess I got these little minor obsessions here and there.
Well, it's funny. Kramer shot one past the goalie, right? But we kind of never found out if he had that kid.
Yeah. Well,
away from that.
Yeah, that was best left alone, I think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, Peter, back to themes. A lot of your episodes had recurring characters, like the Visa with Babu and Ping, the Masseuse Risotto Girl, the Scofflaw with Jake Charmel and Mr. Lipman, et cetera, et cetera. Was this intentional, or was that part of kind of Larry's original vision of the script or that particular year?
I would say that was not exactly intended, but, you know, just the way Larry was doing things, you know, you'd follow along. And it was always better if you could, if you're going to have outside characters, it was always nice to have someone that you've already had, you know, because, you know, in a way you wanted to make the world seem at least somewhat realistically finite, you know, like they didn't know 8 million people. So, you know, I was always drawn to the much smaller slice of life stories. So, you know, I didn't want to bring in some really super dominant guest character, you know, a character that was going to get all the laughs at the expense of our main characters. You know, I really for me personally, it was really important that the main characters drove all the stories.
We appreciate
Did you have
that.
a favorite? Did you have a favorite secondary character? Like for me, it was Lipman. I don't know why.
Yeah, he was pretty great because you never exactly knew what he was thinking. You know, like he really loved Elaine, but he kind of liked screwing with her a little bit. You know, he was always messing with her head. You know, I don't think I had one in particular of the outside characters that was, no, not really.
You mentioned Larry kind of driving some things there when you were talking about, you know, recurring characters and things. In my opinion, your episodes sounded the most like Larry David. It's almost like I would have thought he wrote some of them if, you know, wasn't such a deep fan of the show and knew that you wrote them. But I'm just saying, like, the way you wrote George, you know, some of the lines you came up with, like, I'm living 20 lies, my whole life is a sham, you know, just, you really captured George. And we were just talking about before you came on, just the, you know, the Hamptons George, obviously, but just, did you write for Larry because you knew his sense of humor, or did you share his sense of humor? Was it like intentional? Because it just seems like of all the writers on the show, yours, you know, connected with Larry David's humor the most, in my opinion.
I agree with you definitely on the story front. You know, Larry loved doing small slice of life stories, tiny little things that would blow up. And that's where I wanted to always be. You know, like I wasn't, you know, into having, you know, Kramer driving a bus or, you know, things like that. You know, that's just not the kind of stuff that I would even think about. You know, there were other writers who did. You know, but I was always kind of wedded to Larry's original, you know, concept of the show, you know, that just these tiny little stories. So, you know, and as far as, you know, dialogue and funny lines, you know, I think I did share, like, Larry's sensibility in that way. You know, like every time I'd read one of Larry's scripts, I'd go up to him and he'd go, "Your favorite line you're about to tell me?" And I just tell him, and he go, "Yeah, I would have guessed that was the one you would."
Do you have any of those that you could think of that were your favorite lines of his, or?
You know, there was one really early on that I just absolutely loved, where George says, "I've never really had an appointment where I wanted the other person to show up."
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I use it all the time.
One of the greatest lines in the history of TV.
Agreed.
I think I probably have that thought once a week.
We had that thought right now. We wanted to talk to you.
I know. Anytime something's canceled, I'm happy.
So, Peter, it's been well established, right? Like, Seinfeld wasn't the typical sitcom, right? Like, behind the scenes, like, no writers' rooms, you name it, right? But can you kind of give us a sense of the structure? Like, did Larry and Jerry have a vision for certain seasons? Like in theory, the Hamptons, you could have plopped that in any season, right? Like, I know season 4 had an arc, and you had a lot of standalone episodes there, but, like, just how did it work? Like, before the season, did, like, Larry and Jerry sit everyone down and say, "Hey, this is kind of what we're thinking," and you kind of just pitch concepts or full scripts? Can you touch on a little bit of the process and the structure?
Season 4 was the only season where there was an arc or any kind of story started at the beginning that we knew was going to carry on. Maybe also you think about season 7 when George and Jerry, you know, talk about getting married, and, you know, so there's that plot line. But otherwise, you know, you'd come in the beginning of the season, we would not sit down and have kind of a overall look at the season meeting. You just had to come in with story ideas. You know, here's my list of Elaine stories. Here's my list of George stories, Jerry stories. And, you know, Larry and, you know, Jerry would just say, "No, I like that one. Yeah, nah, I don't think so." And then, you know, you were kind of on your own to match up the different character stories into one script. I mean, you know, you were very much on your own, but, you know, at least you had that approval of some of your ideas, so, you know, you were going in the right direction. But, you know, that put a lot on you, and it made it very, you know, it made it difficult. You know, it definitely was harder than most sitcoms where you know, you're sitting around in a room and you're beating out these stories as a group, you know, beat by beat. and then all you're basically doing is going back and doing dialogue, which is, dialogue is the easiest part of it.
So that's interesting. So essentially you came up with like X amount of ideas for George, Jerry, Elaine, and then kind of pieced them together. I guess the question is, did any of them not match? Like the Hamptons, for instance, were there other storylines that were supposed like in your head for that one, but didn't make sense?
In the Hamptons, I had the idea of the girlfriend going topless and the others seeing her before everybody else, before George did, which, in a much different form happened to me in real life. And
we're listening.
Yeah, no, I had a friend whose girlfriend, the thing was, he had been dating her for quite a while, and all of a sudden one day she went, topless on the deck of the summer house, and my little thought was, wow, he put so much effort into getting to see this, and I'm getting it for free, which was kind of like I had lying around. And the other story that I just loved, once I had decided that they do a whole story in the Hamptons, for some reason, the ugly baby idea, I just knew that Larry and Jerry would love that. And so, that dictated that woman, who used to go, the baby, you got to see the baby, she had been in prior episodes. So, there was 2 stories there. I had a little bit of a difficult time coming up with the Elaine story, but, having the doctor describe the baby and the ugly baby and Elaine as breathtaking, that was kind of, okay, that was good. And the Kramer story, I didn't have really much of anything. And, I needed a lot of help. And, that was a lot of groupthink coming up with, what Kramer would do there. Again, Kramer, going out to the beach and finding lobsters is probably a little bit outside of the kind of stories I think of.
Yeah, but those Kramer lines like, okay, show's over, or she's got a great body, like always resonate, like spot on. So again, Hamptons for me.
The best one was Jerry going, Boutros, oh. That was a Jerry line. And, such a great line. Jerry probably, it's amazing how little he has to know to make like the perfect joke. He probably had a vague idea that Boutros Ghali was like the guy at the United Nations. And, the fact that the guy had like, the same name twice, only Jerry would like really hook into that. I love that.
Yeah, it's one of our favorites. It's definitely one of our favorites. We had ranked all of them prior to earlier on in our podcast. Speaking of that, Jerry saying Boutros Ghali, sort of. I just rewatching your episodes. There are so many reactions that are so good, and I don't know if you wrote it in the script, if it was a director at the time, if it was the actor, but a couple of them that come to mind is George puts his head in the oven when he finds out his parents are getting divorced. In the Implant, when there's an emergency and he's in the background, doing his thing when she's on the phone with the aunt. In the shower head, Jerry drops his bottle when he finds out his parents are moving back to staying in New York. I mean, those stuck out. Obviously, the Elaine push, the first push by Elaine and Get Out. I mean, do you know? I mean, you might know. Obviously, you wrote the episode, but like, did you write that in there? Any of those, or was that like the director? Is that actors?
That's the actors.
All of that, yeah. Wow, holy cow.
They do that during the week. I mean, the Get Out. I didn't even know that was in one of them. That was like,
yeah. Well, it is what it. Yeah, it's not the end all. I thought the head in the oven was one of the best reactions for George.
That was just all like stuff they figured out on the set, which was why they had so much fun. In a way, you didn't really want to give too much stage direction in your scripts because the actors working things out and coming up with stuff like that was so much fun for them. And, especially when you think about when it comes to Julia, you don't want to give her much in the way of instruction, because every line you write for her that you love, she's going to more than likely speak it in a way that you never dreamed of, and at first you're like, wait, that's not right. And then you go, oh, no, it's not right. It's 10 times better.
So it's not like the pilot when George is on the set telling him what to do, and Jerry's like, I don't think these actors really like it when you tell them that. That's kind of true to form. That you're not really on the set when the actors are doing their thing. You've written it, and you give it, and then it's on them to.
Well, yeah, they spend a lot of time, and then like at the read-throughs or something like that, you could make little suggestions here or there. Mm-hmm. We were all very free to chime in if we felt strongly about something,
Yep.
So Peter, I think a big part of the show was the sports references. Yeah. You make a lot, like the apartment with the marathon, MSG, the Knicks game being taped, the implant, right? Can't go left. Mickey Mantle corked the bat. Why play man-to-man? We could play zone. And what's really interesting is in the Visa and the smelly car, right? And I know you're a New York guy, but the specific references mentioning Joe Pepitone, Hank Bauer, Moose Gower, and Clete Boyer, right? And Kramer mentioning the Steinbrenner trading away Buhner, McGee, Drayback, McGriff, and then Jerry with the great line. I know the list, right?
We all know the list.
We love it. As New Yorkers, we love it. But why was it so important to get so specific, especially on a national show, right? I mean, we loved it here, but can you touch on that a little bit?
One thing I always admired and loved about Larry is that if he thought it was funny and he thought it was real, the fact that 70% of the audience might not get it, that didn't bother him. And that was that's an incredibly important part of the show, because the downfall of the sitcom is not trusting your audience to get things. That's what that kills humor, and it kills the sitcom, and it's funny, I was just looking at an old New Yorker cartoon the other day, and it was like a woman in therapy saying to her therapist, do you think you could, talk to me like you're Terry Gross, who is, the host of Fresh Air on NPR. Now I was thinking that's like Seinfeld, because only X percentage of the people are going to get it. So, Larry, he stuck to his guns, if he thought something was funny, it didn't matter. And, ultimately, he wrote an episode about John Cheever. He wrote the Cheever letters, okay, so you know what? They're not going to know who John Cheever is, but, maybe they'll look it up on their own. Maybe they'll actually find out who John Cheever is, because people want to know if they don't get it. Yeah. So I don't think if it was funny or good, we weren't going to let that stop us.
Were you, I'm just curious, growing up, you grew up in Queens. Were you, I know you wear a Dodger blue now, but were you a Yankee fan?
Yes.
But you're not anymore?
No, I still am.
All right. Just because, I mean, it's funny. Obviously Larry's a Yankee fan and Jerry's a Met fan, and they had the Hernandez episode, but I guess the character of Steinbrenner was just too compelling not to latch on to the Yankees. Was that kind of the thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, that's Larry. Larry's like a Yankee freak.
Yeah.
Speaking of Larry, actually, I had this one written down because I know he's the man in the cape in your episode when you wrote, the man in the cape with the Chinese woman episode. First of all, did you come up with that idea about a man in a cape?
Yes.
Okay, that's just an amazing guy. Did you know a guy in a cape, or you just thought that'd be a funny thing to do?
Yes, I knew a woman who was dating a film director whose name I'm forgetting, but he wore a cape.
So Larry played that guy. So
Yeah.
he also was the, you know, a Dalrymple on the green piece on the raft, and he was in a newsstand with the lips on the bill. Besides his voice being in countless things, like, was there any conscious decision? Because, you know, after we saw him on Curb all those years later, you know, being on camera so much, did he want to be the man of the cape, or was it just a matter of necessity? Did he just think it'd be funny? Because that was a kind of a funny character. He really didn't say a word. I don't know. We both got a chuckle out of it, and just interesting when he chose to be on camera and when he didn't.
Yeah, I don't think there was any rhyme or reason to it. It was just like at certain times it would be good to just have Larry do it. You know, I think the only line he had in there is, you know, at the end when he goes, "I'm Frank Costanza's lawyer."
That's funny.
It is. That's it. That's funny right there. When you deliver it, it's hilarious.
And, you know, like the whole story about George's parents splitting up, you know, like
amazing.
My whole idea of that was that they split up. The reason they split up is because it was enough already.
Yeah, Jerry, have you ever met them before? Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
Peter, you mentioned, you know, writing for Elaine and George and letting the characters do their thing. I mean, and you often reference, like, getting out on top, right, and staying true to the original principles of the show, right? Not getting involved in, like, Kramer driving the bus or the Puerto Rican Day Parade. The way we've kind of analyzed the show is, we feel like Jerry and Kramer, for the most part, stayed consistent on how they acted, and George kind of changed a little bit after season 6, which was kind of like, ha-ha, like yelling and stuff like that. And Elaine became more of a power woman, if you will. Did you guys notice that? Was that something that was written, or was that something, because we noticed it was kind of a shift when it moved from Tom Sharonas to Andy Ackerman. At least with those two characters, did the writers have a sense of that, or write towards the changing the characters, or did you not notice that?
I noticed it, but, you know, I didn't really, you know, at least hopefully from my point of view, take part in it. You know, I mean, I just, you know, I didn't, like I said, I wanted to continue with the smallest possible stories I could. And, you know, there were times when I objected when I thought things were going a little over the top. And, you know, and maybe there were times when, you know, Jason was feeling like he had to push it a little bit more to, you know, to get the laughs or something like that. And, you know, I mean, the funny thing is, you know, the level of success the show had, you know, the budgets went through the roof. So, you know, it got to be more and more where you could, instead of, you know, thinking about the number of sets that you're using just to keep the, you know, because it costs a lot of money just to build any new set. You know, it was like $25,000 every time you built a new set or something like that. And those were things we thought about in the early seasons. You know, but once the budget became virtually unlimited, you know, there was a lot of outside scenes and, you know, really big stuff. And, you know, some of the episodes earlier, which were pretty big, were fantastic, you know, like the parking garage, or, you know, the, you know, like when the cabin burns down, you know, I mean, these were, you know, big episodes. So, I mean, yes, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not totally sure that Jerry remained exactly the same, but his growth was kind of interesting. I mean, you know, there was a certain point in, you know, during the Junior Mint where he realized that he could get away with kind of being a prick.
Valid point.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, I think Jerry just compared to the other 2 or 3, probably a little more consistent. But yeah, I think he definitely grew as a character for sure.
You know, it helped also that he grew as an actor a little. You know, he got a little bit more confident.
Yeah, it's noticeable for sure. This kind of a side question, not so much Seinfeld related, but I noticed you're a big doodler. you actually sell doodles. I noticed. Like, are they doodles on the script? Like, talk to me about doodling. It's kind of an odd question, but I'm a doodler too, and my daughter doodles now, and she's only in 3rd grade, and she told me she was like, she's on Zoom calls now for her classes, and she's like, you know, it looks like I'm not paying attention, but I really am paying more attention when I doodle. And I thought she summed it up perfectly. And, you know, I've read articles about that too, that it helps you concentrate and things like that. I'm just curious. I noticed you're a big doodler.
Absolutely. And I've said that, and I had to say the same thing during Seinfeld, you know, like if in those occasions where we would meet as a group or something like that, I was doodling anyway, but you know, I'd always be doodling, and it got to the point, and I would say that I'm paying more attention.
Exactly.
I was just like your daughter. I was saying that I'm much more focused on what's going on than anybody else. But at a certain point, Larry and Jerry banned me from doodling during during any meetings, and you know, so I have all these Seinfeld covers that I doodled on, and we made prints out of some of them, and they're now available at popular prices on bravely-oblivious.com or my website, petermehlman.com.
Yeah, that's where I saw them on your web. I just thought that was, I was so, I don't know. I love doodling too. I thought that was interesting. That's hilarious that they banned you.
And now it's basically, you know, my whole life, because, you know, for the last 4 years, I'm sitting there watching, you know, MSNBC obsessively, you know, and, you know, and I don't really want to see any of these people. You know, I certainly don't want to see Trump on my screen. So, you know, like got my head down doodling.
Crazy.
So, Peter, you wrote, in my opinion, like some of the most iconic, from even I think the Visa's up there, the Implant, the Hamptons clearly, but you mentioned that you have 2 to 3 stinkers that you wrote. Care to share which ones you were referring to?
I don't really like The Good Samaritan very much. You know, I don't, The Good Samaritan, there were a few. I'm forgetting which others.
What didn't you like about The Good Samaritan? I think it's very underrated.
The Good Samaritan is the early one, right?
Yeah, with, you know, the penis and the brain.
Oh yeah.
Season 3, it's the season 3 episode. Yeah,
you know, it has some good moments. The penis brain thing was Larry and Jerry's idea. I don't know. I didn't like so much what happened with you know, the woman who Jerry met when she hit somebody's car and drove off. I don't know. I don't feel like that story went anywhere. You know, and there are other things. The one, I'm trying to remember the one where Newman had all the parking. Yeah, the scofflaw. I'm not crazy about that one.
That has a great. That's
yeah, go John Lovitz.
That's John Lovitz. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that written for him? Because it almost seemed like it was written for him.
You know what? We were having so much trouble with it and blah blah blah, and then we actually called him, I think, on like a Saturday night, and said, "We have a part for you. Which you cut? We're having a read through tomorrow."
Wow.
You know, because we would, you know, like Jerry always used to say when the season started, you know, you'd be sitting there and, you know, in the pre-production period, writing scripts and everything like that. But once you were actually shooting shows, he would always be saying, "Well, we can't see land now." And so, you know, sometimes you'd hit stormy weather, and, you know, we'd have our read through on a Sunday, you know, which drove some people crazy. But what can you do?
Before we might kind of dive into some of the episodes you wrote a little bit more, actually. But before we did, I had another non-Seinfeldian question, because I read I read Mandela was late, and I saw at the end you thanked your brother for getting into the Allman Brothers Band. I'm curious, your favorite Allman Brothers Band song or album, show if you've seen them.
I only saw them once. You know, later on, actually, it was on a date with Rachel, the girl who was in 3-episode arc, and
Okay.
she was in Larry's incredibly genius idea of getting caught making out during Schindler's List, which was to me like the greatest idea that ever happened on the show.
And she got brought back for the Hamptons.
She was in the Hamptons, and then she was in the next episode too, when things started switching around for George, the opposite.
Another classic.
So yeah, I went with her to see the Allman Brothers, and I like Melissa. That song kind of just kills me. I like any song sung by Greg.
So you were dating Rachel?
Yeah.
Huh. She hasn't been in. I looked her up recently. She hasn't been in anything since Seinfeld, right? Or has she?
I mean, she was in a few things, I'm sure, and she was also in a really funny episode of Curb. You know, where he goes to an incest support group with her, and it turns out that she was molested by her stepfather, and Larry goes, "Oh, that doesn't really count, does it?" Yeah, because and she has that great line where she goes, "Oh, you mean like if it's my parent, if it's a birth parent, biological parent, it's incest, and if it's a step parent, it's a date?" Yeah.
Was there any talk? Did you do anything? Did you want to be on Curb? Were you asked to be on Curb? Anything like that? Any crossover at all, or you just kind of stayed away? Or
no, yeah. First of all, when Curb started, I was on my DreamWorks deal.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think my first, or maybe my second. I had 2 DreamWorks terms, so like I couldn't do anything like that, and it was kind of like time to fly on my own anyway. My pilot for It's Like had its table read the morning after the final episode of Seinfeld was shot.
Oh wow! So back
at about 1 in the morning, I said to Larry and Jerry, "Well, I gotta go." And Larry was like, "God, I feel like I'm sending my kid off to college," which was kind of nice.
So Peter, do you ever get together with, I guess, the old gang, if you will, like Jerry? Like when I think of the Mount Rushmore, right, of Seinfeld, Larry, Charles, yourself, Jerry, and obviously Larry David. Do you guys ever get together, like socially?
Not as a group, Jerry, once in a while I'll see him out here. I haven't in a while. Larry, I see, quite a bit because we live near each other and we both go to this dog park. So I've been seeing him quite a bit lately, which has been great. And he's got an Australian Shepherd now named Bernie.
Bernie?
Yeah, is really unbelievably cute.
Obviously, Bernie Sanders, I'm assuming.
I would assume. And Larry, Charles, I usually get together for coffee, once or twice a year. But, we're all busy in different places. It's,
I wanted to just kind of throw a few things out from some of the episodes, if you don't mind, and kind of just random questions, some of them maybe, but just like always kind of on the top of my mind when I watch these episodes. Like, I don't know, for instance, in The Virgin, that's the episode also where they go to the NBC meeting for the eventual pilot. Was that talked about already? Like the butler idea is going to be the idea, or you wrote that for that episode and then it just got carried through towards the end when they actually did the pilot? I don't know, random question, but the butler idea, like, was that something you came up with in that script for the Virgin?
I think that was Larry. the main idea I had is that George was dating this, was dating Susan, who was working at NBC, and he gives her, and they kiss at the end, and she gets fired.
So
which was actually.
Did that happen? Did you know?
Which was one of the few times that there was any strife after a read through, because Castle Rock thought it was a little cold that George got this girl fired, and we were like, I was kind of like, well, what the hell, and Glenn Padnick got very upset about that, and he was the the head of TV at Castle Rock, and I called him up later, and I said, I didn't mean to be callous or offend you or anything like that. And he just said, look, it was an honest disagreement, and I really appreciate the call. So
yeah, did any episodes, it's funny you brought that up, and I read this year Jerry had an issue with the alternate side episode, right, when they were feeding Elaine's boyfriend who passed out. Like,
yeah,
were there any episodes that you think went over the line, or obviously wouldn't happen today, but at the time that you had an issue with not as a writer, but maybe as a producer when you got together with everyone?
Nothing that really offended me, I didn't, I know Jerry, wasn't thrilled with that scene, although, I don't know, to me, that scene was out of this world.
Incredible. My favorite episode of all time. It's incredible.
I was on the edge of my seat for that scene. To me, it was just unbelievably great. I mean, it was just so.
What's an extremity?
Oh my God. And, I don't think I was ever offended, by anything that seemed racist or anything like that. Of course, you'd have to be about 1,000 times more sensitive about that kind of thing now than you were then. And no, if I ever thought anything was over the line, it was just over the line of believability,
Yeah, listen, I watched Donna Chang last night, and yeah, would it get made today? Who knows? Kramer has a.
I love that episode. That's one of the ones that I thought was, that was kind of underrated. I actually really like that episode.
Oh, it's classic Frank and Estelle for sure. I mean, I just love that scene when they're screaming at you.
And also, as a New Yorkers, when Estelle says, I'm not listening to some girl from Long Island. I just love that, because there's nothing I hate more than Long Island. So.
The another one that's a classic Kramer, when you said you had stories for different actors or characters, and kind of would put them into shows when they kind of fit. The Kramer Goes to Fantasy Camp and the Visa, that's one of Kramer's best storytelling scenes, telling that whole story about being at the fantasy camp. And George's line about Kramer going to fantasy camp is one of the top lines of all time. His whole life's a fantasy camp. I mean, those two together, was that your idea? And had you ever gone to a fantasy camp, or did anyone?
That was actually an idea Larry said. I was just talking to Larry about things, and we talked about fantasy camps, and he goes, yeah, that would be a good story. You should, and at that time I didn't think of it. I just wasn't thinking like that. So. But
you wrote the story Kramer tells.
I mean, it was added and polished some more.
Right.
I
so good.
At that point I was not really. Confident enough to write that long of a monologue. Not that I couldn't write it, I just didn't know, if it was right to have an actor like that, have one of the characters go on like that so long.
And I think your favorite episode, clearly you've talked about this, is the Implant, right? You thought it was the perfect episode. You mentioned earlier, you wrote certain ideas, and then in the beginning of the year, then you tied all together. Did you have the Jerry story and the George double dip story in your head together, or like how did that whole thing come about? Like, and it was season 4, right? So that was the arc season. So like clearly the Implant could have run any time. Like, when did you come up with that?
You know, that was, you know, like it was my second full season on the show. And, you know, I was still struggling, you know, as having been a journalist before, I was still struggling with like, you know, creativity and how to come up with these stories and things like that. And that, for that episode, I just happened to have a whole bunch of scenes that I thought were really funny, you know, like the airport scene or a fight at a fight at a wake, you know, talking to a girl who and another girl walks by and the one you're talking to says, oh, they're fake. And, you know, the death in the family fair, I had that. And I love, you know, thinking that Salman Rushdie is at your gym. You know, so I had all of those scenes, all those kind of like, they all seem like completely unrelated, but really funny scenes. And somehow I found a way of mashing them all up together. And, you know, at that point, you know, all into stories. And, you know, the first act of that episode feels like it lasts about 30 seconds. It flies so fast and it's so good. And, you know, at that point I thought, okay, now I've really got it. I know how I'm going to write all these scripts now. I'm just going to have all these funny scenes and find a way to string them along. This is going to be great.
So it's funny. You were like, it sounds like you felt uncomfortable, not uncomfortable, but a little uneasy the first couple of years. Were you ever like, you know, you wrote for Mademoiselle, you said, Elle, etc., Washington Post, and all of a sudden you're with a bunch of comedians, right, writing the sitcom. Like, did you, I guess, was it the Implant that at that moment you felt like you belonged?
Yeah. The Implant, then kind of the Smelly Car. You know, after this, when we were shooting the Smelly Car, I was sitting next to Jerry between, you know, takes of one of the scenes, and he says, "Boy, you really made the team this year." And so that was pretty great.
Because you didn't know any of these guys really, right? You bumped into Larry twice, and this all happened kind of fast and by luck, as you say, right?
Yeah, it was all luck.
I know you definitely pulled some of your, I think anyway, at least from the book I read, I'm assuming some of those are at least somewhat autobiographical. The stories like the 16-year vomit streak that Jerry has. I believe you had a streak such as that that you talk about in that book. I mean, how many did you have to, speaking to this point that O'Hara just mentioned about being kind of thrown into this, were you just going back into a database of like what stories do I have that I can throw in at any moment, like just collecting them almost?
Constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I saw that Larry got, you know, he was so ripe with ideas, and so many of them came from thoughts that, you know, just went through his head, and he would write them down. And, you know, he had this mechanism in his head where he could like basically live life and yet still be incredibly aware of these tiny thoughts that were going through his head. You know, it's a tough trick. And, you know, for a while it was, I felt like I was like not even living an existential life because I was so focused on all my little thoughts. And, you know, it just, being creative was like an all new thing for me, you know? So, but the funny thing is, you know, yada, yada, I didn't, you know, I had a meeting with an editor from a women's magazine in like 1988, you know, like 9 years before I wrote that episode about. And I don't know what, and she said yada yada a couple of times during lunch, and I remember thinking, oh, I've never heard anything like that. That's funny. And then it wasn't in my mind again for like 9 years, and then it popped into my head, and I was thinking, you know, that's kind of funny, you know, like you could really kind of gloss over all forms of criminality with, you know, with a little one. And,
Well, it's funny, and yada yada. You mentioned another you mentioned another print publication that I used to work at, USA Today. It was funny, a Washington Post guy mentioning USA Today, but I remember everyone at USA Today was, you know, very happy that got mentioned on Seinfeld, and probably helped circulation for a couple of years.
Were you a writer there?
No, sales.
I want to be that latex salesman.
Sales at newspapers are pretty much done.
Well, it's funny, but Seinfeld, right? Like Time Magazine, TV Guide. You mentioned USA Today. Like it's a
glamour.
The internet wasn't around back then, but
Glamour.
it was obviously a big theme.
How great is it that Larry chose glamour for what he, you know? And I remember Jerry. Was it Jerry? He just like looked over and goes, "Glamour?"
Yeah.
Actually, Peter, now you mention that, like Glamour, the Junior Mint, like were those? I don't think it was. Those were not product placements, right? You guys didn't get paid for that.
Not only were they not, did we not get paid for it? You know, we weren't supposed to do it. You know, technically, no. You know, shows wouldn't let you do that. You know, mention products. You know, there were times when, I don't know if you ever noticed, but you know, back then, you know, like
it would just say cola or chips.
Yeah, exactly. Coke. You know, they like put a piece of tape over Coca.
Right.
You know, for Coca-Cola. I don't know. You know, it's just. You know, we just did it. You know, like I had. You know, I mentioned Snapple for
Virgin.
In the Virgin. You know, that I think that was the first time it was mentioned. And, you know, it just seemed like a funny little aside to say Snapple, you know, because it was a funny word, you know. And
Too fruity.
Yeah, and Junior Mint, I mean, that was an unbelievably funny thing. I mean, when Kramer goes, when Jerry, it's a small little mint. It's a Junior Mint. You know,
That's delivered.
Just genius.
So were you involved? Like, I know you didn't write that show, but you were heavily involved in every episode, right?
To varying degrees, you know. I mean, if I was, you know, up to my neck in some episode I was writing, I was less involved. You know, the funny thing is, I was in that condition when I happened to walk past the set when they did the Subway episode, and Tom Sharonis needed somebody my height to be in the Subway. And that's how I wound up, you know, as a disgruntled Subway rider that Elaine thought smelled, you know. That was me behind her.
All right. Oh, nice.
Now I'm gonna have to rewatch that one.
Yeah, I'm trying. I got it in my head. I'm picturing it. When you're talking about when she's stuck in going to the lesbian wedding, right?
Yeah, and she, oh, guy smells. That was me.
Yeah. That's an inner dialogue of her saying that. And we made a note. You used that technique a lot, the inner dialogue. You used it. One of the best is when George is driving to the Hamptons. Right now, I can't touch your breast, and this time tomorrow, I can touch your breast.
Yeah, it's like being in a private club.
Yeah, the private club. Speaking of, yeah.
I did use it a lot, but I always used it with a little bit of trepidation because, you know, I like the normal action to tell the story, but once in a while, you know, if you could get a laugh out of it, it's different, you know?
Of course. Speaking of laughs, Del Boca Vista in the shower head. Is that you? Did you come up with the Del Boca Vista name?
I think I had it slightly different than Larry changed it.
But you wrote the Costanza line about, you know, we're moving in lock, stock, and barrel. We're going to be all over the shuffleboard court, that whole thing.
Yeah, I don't exactly remember, you know, like the specific lines or if Larry did a rewrite on that, and Larry and Jerry, but yeah, those are some funny scenes.
Well, it's funny. I read in the news today. It's not funny, but this guy from Africa just got elected, and his name is Adolf Hitler. And it brought me back to the Joel Rifkin episode. Like, was like having an unfortunate name, right?
There's another episode where, like, you know, who outside of New York is going to know who Joel Rifkin is?
And who outside of New York is going to know who Bob Shepard is? And you guys,
Exactly. I was
including
just
him.
going to say that. Did you guys get Bob Shepard to do that specifically?
Yes. You know, we were talking to him through, you know, an audio place. You know, he was in New York. And at one point he said, well, you know, I wouldn't really say this. And we would like, that's okay.
That's another New York thing that got slipped in that we actually obviously love.
Joel Rifkin was I love that one. I just love that idea of, you know, I did have that seemed to be another theme, you know, that I had, you know, about like people changing their appearance, changing their names, you know.
Yeah, changing appearance for sure. Yeah, nose job.
And okay. From a character point of view, I know you really like writing for Elaine. I know you wrote a lot of women magazines, but like, was there a certain character that was more challenging for you? I mean, I think the work you do with George, like, it's perfect George, but what about Kramer and Jerry? Were they harder from a writing perspective to bring them to life?
No, Jerry and Elaine were easier for me.
Really?
Yeah. Kramer, I had a lot of trouble coming up with stories for him for a long time. And then in the, what's the episode where he gets the girl pregnant? Is that the Chinese? No.
The Chinese woman, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when all of a sudden I, you know, on my dry erase board of ideas where I have, you know, 4 character names and my ideas listed under them, I had Jerry low sperm count. And all of a sudden, I was having so much trouble coming up with Kramer stories. I was like, what if I just give a Jerry story to Kramer? And he would just, you know, take it to a crazy place on his own. You know, like give a really grounded story to Kramer. And that was like a revelation. So, you know, I gave that story, and that kind of eased my my Kramer story problem. George was, you know, fun to write for, but I thought, you know, Jerry and Elaine being the two more, you know, grounded, well-adjusted to some degree people, I liked writing for them more. I'm probably the only writer on the staff who was like that. But
yeah, just quick. I know we touched on this earlier. So the episode where with what's her name, the Ping's cousin, like George didn't want Jerry there, but then in the masseuse, the risotto girl comes back, like George did want Jerry there.
Yeah.
Any rhyme or reason there? Or just it was funny.
Those were just story. You know, I mean, in the risotto episode, I remember going up to Larry on the set one day and just said, you know, I got this idea where Jerry dates a girl who just hates George. And he goes, that's a perfect Mehlman story. The masseuse was it was okay.
It was classic George, I thought. I just love whenever George gets himself into a pickle, like, you know, about the sister not being so good looking, so she got a ticket. I never saw your sister, but I'm sure she's not she can't be too ugly if she had tickets.
Yeah, I mean,
it's always great.
The things he got away with saying were just unbelievable.
We don't want to take up too much of your time here, Peter. I know we're coming up on an hour. O'Hara.
Peter, I guess just off cuff, like knowing that you dated Rachel, did you date anybody else from the show?
No comment.
Fair enough. We'll take the Rachel one.
Yeah, that was awesome. No, this was great. I mean, this was. I can't thank you enough for giving us your time. This is
a pleasure.
Incredible.
You guys are top shelf in your knowledge and observations, I have to say.
Coming from you, that's all. Thank you so much.
We enjoy the product.
Where are you guys?
We're in New York, New Jersey. We're suburbs of the city, basically. So just over the Palisades Parkway where Newman got pulled over for a speeding ticket. We're over in that area.
I just wrote an article about my mother, 94 years old, getting pulled over for speeding.
Oh my gosh.
She didn't get pulled over, actually. She got a ticket for speeding from one of those cameras.
Oh, the cameras.
Yeah, I sent it to them. It was such a perfect piece for the New York Times, but they're very grim now. They're very, 2,000 people a day are dying, so it's kind of a rough time for humor.
Is your mother still in New York?
She's in Queens. Yeah. So it's in the form of a letter to Governor Cuomo, and I ended up selling it, like placing it in the Albany Times-Union.
I got my Albany right now.
Oh my God, that's University of New York. That's SUNY Albany.
SUNY Albany, yep. Exit 23. All right, so Peter, real quick, the Knicks, they got a New York kid from Ossining High School. What do you think? Couple years away still. The NBA, you need one of the big guys.
They're like, I'd say they're like 3 years away from being 2 years away. Look, as long as they have that owner, they're going to have problems.
That reminds me of the Subway episode where Jerry's talking to the guy about the Mets, and they're going through everything that's wrong with them. And at the end, you still like their chances, though, right? So he's like, yeah, I still like their chances.
But they got who's the relief? But they got Orozco.
Yeah, they got Coleman. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I love all that sports stuff. I love it's like finding out that Mickey Mantle corked his bat.
Oh, that's a great line. Yeah.
Incredible line.
Yeah. See, there's one line in that show I actually don't like, though. When Elaine says, every time I think you're, the shallowest man I know, you seem to let a little bit more out of the pool. I never liked that joke. It felt written to me, the one thing I loved about Seinfeld is like the funniest things were not jokes. Kramer saying, you're as pretty as any of them. You just need a nose job. That's what you're going for. That's what you want. The biggest possible laugh on something that in and of itself, it's not that funny. In and of itself, that's not a joke. It just happens that in the dialogue, it is hysterical, in context of the situation, it's incredibly funny, but, on its own, it's not really funny. But, Elaine's line there sounded a little bit, just sounded a little bit written.
100%. I agree 100%.
Well,
Yeah.
Peter, thanks.
It was
really appreciate it.
This was a pleasure, Zara. This was amazing, Peter. Thank you so much. Well, this was incredible.
No, it was a pleasure taking time out from my empty schedule.
He said that on Twitter. We weren't sure if that was sarcasm. You don't understand. That messed with us for a little while. We're going back. Is he serious? Does he really want to? And then because it could have been like a sarcastic.
Oh,
yes, it was sarcastic. And
I guess it could be that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were
like, who's got anything to do now? Not that it's changed my life significantly, but
Right.
I miss going.
This was great, though.
All right,
I really appreciate it.
Guys, and,
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. All right.